Hello, BookTube. This is Al. I'm back again, this time coming to complete the BookTube Newbie Tag. Though I've uploaded a few videos, this is something that I haven't done yet. I'll also be uploading a little bit later on the BookTube AuthorTube, the AuthorTube Newbie Tag. So you can look forward to both of those from me. There might be some overlap between the two, but I plan on participating in both corners of this strange little place on YouTube. The first question is, why did I start this channel? Um, I've thought a long time about starting the channel. Took a lot of consideration into the work that it would take in terms of finding time to be able to record videos on the things that I've read, to be able to participate with the community. I mostly have done my reading in solitary environments. In other words, I don't really discuss most of the books I've read with other people, at least when it comes to fiction. Um, and so, with that, a few years ago, I found myself digging around on YouTube and other areas of the internet to start finding people's comments, their thoughts on books that they had read. I think one of the first booktubers I found was the Book Chemist. At the time, I didn't even realize that the booktube was really a thing, even after following a few of his videos. Then later on, that world started opening up to me as I saw more and more videos. Um, so, with that, I said it was something I considered for a long time. Um, wasn't certain if I had the time to put forth the effort. I've got a teenage daughter who's getting ready to head off to college. We just finished all her college applications and have heard back from everywhere. So fortunately, that's winding down, which should give a lot more time on my schedule. Was almost lured out of the shadows with ShakeTube back in October. That's when I finally started posting a couple comments here and there. It was either that or NaNoWriMo that had me doing that. Um, but it was March of the Mammoths that finally made me decide to break the ice and upload a video. Um, I think the community will be good because it'll have me looking and actually starting to discuss the books. And I think that'll also keep me accountable when it comes to some books in terms of coming through it and kind of formulating my thoughts on some of the things I've been reading. Next question is, what are some fun and unique things I can bring to BookTube? It's a good question. It's not something I've thought a whole lot about. I may wind up bringing some books that aren't too common around here. Certainly, there are books that are common. I've gone through and, like I said, followed a lot of what I'm reading and looked and seen what people have. But we'll have to see. At least be able to bring my perspective, as warped and twisted as you might view that to be, and hopefully some good discussion. So I'm looking forward to discuss the fun and unique things I can bring as well. What am I most excited about for this new channel? Excited to start putting myself out there. It's really easy. I tend to be a pretty, I don't know, reserved person. I'll be outgoing when it comes to certain topics that I'm passionate about. When it comes to online stuff, I'm very reserved about putting myself out there. Partially because of background, where in the past, just some of the environments I worked in, I didn't want to put stuff out there. And then gradually, as I moved away from that, started getting involved in social media a little bit, but still have some reticence towards putting things out online. So I'm excited to get a chance to actually start talking about what the things that I do enjoy reading. Next question is, why do you love reading? Um, Reading is something that let's see, how should I put this? Kind of came to it later in life. Not really. I was a voracious reader when I was young. Once I got into school, and this comes back to what I was talking about with being a deadline-driven person, I can be a horrible procrastinator. I don't like to do things when I have to do them. And so when it came to school, particularly high school, I think, and if any of my old English teachers are still alive and reading this, I apologize, but I think I read one book out of all 4 years, where I actually read through the whole book. Um, that's probably heresy here. Um, I regret it looking back, and I've gone back and reread many of those, or read for the first time, many of those books that I should have read back then, and I've enjoyed them. And it wasn't necessarily because the books were stodgy or not fun books. I just didn't. I don't know. I wasn't a great student, and I could fake it really well. If it was a book the whole class was reading, I would sit back and listen to a little bit of conversation when the conversation started, pick up on what the themes were, and then kind of take over in the conversation. Once again, sorry to any teachers that might have stumbled across this. To the point I was doing and then on individual reading, I would either rely on friends who had read it or read the first and last pages of chapters or stuff here and there occasionally, cliff notes, but usually I wouldn't even read that much of it. But just try to discover what the themes were, and when it came to writing an essay on it, I could BS pretty well, and did that pretty well. In fact, the one time I did read a book, that book was the one I had the most trouble writing an essay on. I felt way too constrained by it, ironically. At any rate, later in life, I came to reading. There were things that I read while I was working in the military. There were times that I had to be at work, working a graveyard shift or something when things weren't active and I could read. Most of the stuff I read then was probably genre stuff that weren't great books, but they were quick reading books that were interesting to go through. Also started reading some nonfiction related to the job I was doing. The job I was working on focused a lot on North Korea, so reading a lot of history there, reading a lot of accounts from defectors, and that sort of thing. I talked about this in another video that I haven't uploaded yet regarding my writing in NaNoWriMo, but that eventually led me to writing my first novel. It was an idea that was planted in my head by one of my high school English teachers. And despite the fact I wasn't reading the books, I loved my teachers in those classes. I loved the classes. How that works, I don't know. But they were some of my favorite classes. I loved the discussions. And one of my high school teachers had us write the first chapter of a historical fiction novel. I think it was the last assignment of our 10th grade AP English class. And so I wrote that, and that story always stuck with me. Then I found out about NaNoWriMo in 2004, decided to start trying to tell that story. It was, I had set it in the time of the Chinese Revolution, and the idea of brother fighting against brother was something that really appealed to me. And even though it was not within the time period he'd given us certain restrictions, but because it was set over in Asia, he gave me a waiver on it and allowed me to write something from that time period. When I approached it later on, I actually wound up moving it to North Korea. There were some insurgents that there had been a book I had read about it, a group that on one of the islands, a group of guerrillas. There were people who had defected from what was North Korea. Once again, this is during the war. So they had defected, and they were running in guerrilla missions, insurgent missions into the territory that the North had behind enemy lines. The group was called the White Tigers. And so I decided to write a book about that. Anyway, I talked more about that in another video. I don't need to go off on a rabbit trail. But that got me reading more books. I had already been reading things about North Korea and the history and stuff, but as I was writing that, and I think it was a good story, but as I was writing that, that really launched me into reading more. And so from that point on, I started reading quite a bit. Went back and reread a lot of the books that I was supposed to read in high school. And from there, if I found an author I liked, I would read through everything they had written. Often, not always. In fact, kind of an ironic thing, when I was reading the instructions recently, the main character in that story, Gurion, was talking about, if you take one story by an author you love, a principal or something was asking him if he had read all the books by that author. And he said no, because once he had done that, he would, maybe it wasn't in the instructions, I don't remember. I think maybe it was in Oster's 4321. And once he had read all the books by that author, there would be no more new books by him to read, which was an interesting perspective on things. I haven't taken that approach to most of my reading. Um, at any rate, I just got into enjoying the craft of it and then coming through and enjoying reading stuff. What book or series got me into reading? I think I explained that in the last question. Um, there wasn't particularly a book or a series at the time. I had just gone back and started reading things, and I think the first author that I really voraciously dug into was Vonnegut. I really enjoyed his reading his things, and so that might be um, that might be there. And I don't remember which book of his I went to first. Um, I can't recall. So I just know I started reading one after the other after I got into that. Um, let's see, what questions would you ask your favorite booktubers? Um, it's another good question, but not something that I have a lot of questions on my mind. Would you like to do a beta read of one of my manuscripts? Maybe. Um, is something that I might ask to get some opinions from readers who aren't necessarily writers. A lot of times in those communities, we wind up exchanging with writers, and that can be a good thing because they can look for structural problems, but also I think we can get focusing on looking at things with an editing eye rather than just taking a look at the story. And that editing eye, once again, can be a very helpful thing, but can also miss some flavor of the book. Um, and give a skewed perspective. I know in my own reading, when I do beta reads for people, the same happens. I have a hard time taking and separating myself from looking at it with a more analytical eye. Um, what challenges do you think starting a BookTube channel will be the hardest to overcome? I think the hardest challenge, like I said earlier, having the time to actually not only read the books, and that's something I can do fairly easily, and it's something that I do already, but taking the time to record the videos, make sure they're edited, make sure they get uploaded in a timely manner. Already today I'm going through a number of videos that I did record while sitting and waiting for my daughter, but didn't have time to come through and put the fine touches on and upload to the channel. Um, Hopefully, as time goes by, particularly as she's finishing up school and heads off to college, I should start having a lot more time to devote to that. Um, when did you start reading? Once again, that's a question that I already answered. I started reading when I was very young, pre-kindergarten. I think my mother had started teaching me young, and I was already reading sentences, paragraphs, and stuff at that age. Um, and so, and like I said, through my youth, I read fairly voraciously. It wasn't until a little bit later in life that I started viewing that as a kind of a chore. But it was probably, to put some time frame on it, it was probably my early to mid 20s when I started reading, and then when I started writing was, I believe I was 28, maybe 30. I guess if 2004 I was 29, just about 20 or just about 30. Um, let's see, where do I read? Anywhere that I can. I'm fortunate at my job. I need to be there in case there are emergencies, but there are also a lot of times with downtime. So I fairly frequently will have Kindle up in the background um, and get a chance to read through things. I read while waiting for my daughter. She has some activities that are a little bit too far away from home, too late at night for her to be able to drive to. Not that she's not a bad driver, but I don't want her breaking down on a freeway an hour from home at 11 o'clock at night. So frequently while sitting and waiting for her, I'll also get a chance to read. I read at home, I read in the bed, I read on couches. Um, so I just read wherever it winds up being convenient. Um, What kind of books do I like to read? Um, it's a good question. Now, how to classify them? I like books with a wry, dark sense of humor. Um, I find myself often in that weird literary category, a category that kind of probably bridges between um, commercial and literary. Sometimes avant-garde, although I haven't gotten too much of the stuff that gets way out there. I have House of Leaves, um, but I haven't really dove into that yet. That's still something on my TBR pile. I'm not certain how I'll deal with it. I'm not a big fan of horror, and I hear that that book gets um, runs down that road. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I enjoy books. Right now I've really been enjoying a lot of metafiction, partially because those are kind of things I write in as well. So just enjoy reading that, seeing some of the different perspectives, um, and just reading and discovering things. Even though I've been to college, I went on a more non-traditional track. I went after being in the military. Um, and so a lot of the authors, and I had already, um, because of AP scores and stuff, I never had to retake the English courses. So I did get a chance from a college perspective to be introduced to a lot of authors. And so a lot of authors I'm kind of discovering on my own as I go, which has been an interesting thing. Like, going to the bookstore, look through and find stuff, or search stuff out on the internet. But it wasn't until a few years ago that I found Thomas Pynchon. I should have found him much earlier. I'm not saying that I write exactly like him. Um, his prose and style are different, but I also write some bizarre stuff, so that fits right in my wheelhouse. And for some reason, for a period of probably 14, 15 years writing bizarre fiction, I had somehow missed him and a bunch of other authors. Um, Maybe some of that goes back to the reason that when I do find an author, I tend to read through their everything that they've written. So that might be why I haven't seen some of the same breadth. That may be a habit I change up though. Like I said, I like the idea of reading here and there and coming back and having new stuff to read by some of these writers, especially writers who have already passed on. At any rate, so that's probably what you'll see from me. I also read a lot of theology books. I've said in another video that I'm a theology nerd. One of my master's degrees was in biblical studies. And so I enjoy reading those, and I'll probably comment on some of those as we go through in the future. We'll see how that winds up working out. Even though I'm joining mostly to discuss fiction, I think. But we'll see where that leads us. At any rate, I think I'll wrap up there. Sorry if I was a little bit rambling as we came into this. Hopefully it gives you a feel for who I am more than what I'll be discussing. But you'll definitely see more from me soon. Like I said, I'm working on uploading a backlog of some videos I had already filmed. So we'll talk to you later, YouTube. And if you've got any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. Feel free to like, subscribe, and if you'd like to see videos as they get posted, go ahead and hit that bell to get the notifications. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.